Farming food and fashion for a discerning world is serious business in Aotearoa, New Zealand. There are new opportunities everywhere just waiting for the open-minded. Sarah's Country shines a light on the matters that matter most. And here's your host, Sarah Perriam.
Well, kia ora and welcome to Sarah's Country, your home to get a deeper picture on the challenges and opportunities facing rural New Zealand and the food and fashion produced from our land, our whenua. I'm your host, Sarah Perriam, and I thank each and every one of you who choose to watch this live premiere of The Opinion Maker every Tuesday from 7 o'clock on Sarah's Country's Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. Premiering videos is a great way to be able to interact with other viewers in the comments below as you're watching along together. But for the majority of you, I know you choose to catch up on demand, you busy people, whether it's on your commute in the mornings or, of course, on the treadmill or even in your tractor. You are a part of a growing movement that choose this podcast as your go-to for an open-minded conversation straight from the horse's mouth, from those driving the change or even those affected by the change. You and your audience, you and our audience are our industry's critical thinkers and our influential change makers in your own right. And this is all, I believe, by choosing Sarah's Country. So kia ora and thank you so much. There has been many of you also signing up to the Sarah's Country Club because you want to stay up to date on the matters that matter most and who's coming up on the show and what episodes you may have missed. So all you need to do is go to sarahscountry.com. On the website, hit the subscribe tab and you'll be sent first thing Sunday mornings a list of things to catch up on and look forward to, because let's be honest, sometimes you can miss things on social media. If you've been following along for a while, you'll know that I am based in Lincoln, where I live, which is in the Selwyn district in Canterbury. It's home to the incredible agricultural science and food innovation, many escaping the hustle and bustle of nearby Christchurch to live in the commuter belt, and of course a colourful community of university students as well. Selwyn is the fastest growing district in New Zealand. Now, there was statistics in 2001 where at the time it was a population of 16,500, that over the next 40 years it would get to nearly 40,000 by 2041, 40,000. Well, in recent statements, Selwyn is set to grow from its current population in 2021 of 67,000, how wrong they were 20 years ago, to 87,000 by 2030. That's double their 2041 prediction. Now, the spread of Lincoln sprawl over the back of my house in Tawharariki is the proposed rezoning of a further 186 hectares of farmland for 2,000 new sections in a small commercial area, which is expanding alongside lifestyle blocks and eating up the land faster than we can plan what we will eat from it. And just as Selwyn is one of the many regions trying to cope here in New Zealand with the pressure of the current attractive monetary policy favouring housing over food security. It's of course around the outskirts of Auckland. We hear a lot around Pukekohe, Hamilton, and of course Tauranga. The recent Our Land 2021 report highlights the fragmentation of our New Zealand land use. The Ministry for the Environment and Statistics New Zealand have outlined how our highly productive land that is now unavailable and irreversible of growing food because it's covered in housing has increased by 54% from 2002 to 2019. Now, this report comes 2 years after a government launched its draft national policy statement on the highly productive land, and there still isn't no policy direction in sight. Whilst lockdowns have come and gone and policy direction on this massive issue has stalled, I continue to hear hammers and diggers right next door as expansion of new housing development continues. While we all know the solution to our country's housing shortage is, of course, releasing more land for supply for those new homes, it is also very short-sighted to the planning of where we are going to be able to continue to feed our people. It is the hottest things on the lips of central and local government, which is trying to come to grips around the expense of losing this valuable farmland to fruit and vegetable growing and, of course, meat and milk production. In Your Opinion Maker this week, we showcase this crossroad that we are at as our society and the intergenerational thinking that is desperately needed. We're going to start by outlining the report with Dr. ALISON Collins, the Departmental Chief Science Advisor to what is now known as Manatu Mō Te Taiao, the Ministry for the Environment, and a bit of a deeper dive in 2021 from that when it first started in 2015. Philip Martelly, the Resource Management Manager for Western Bay of Plenty District Council, is a seasoned senior practitioner when it comes to planning, and he is well versed in the highly productive soils debate. We learn more about the challenges Tauranga, which is also one of the country's fastest growing districts, is having with the pressure on the valuable horticulture land from uneconomic lifestyle lots from Aucklanders moving down. And of course, in 2019, we highlight that 4,131 hectares was covered in rural lots alone, around 2 hectares in size. This is just in Bay of Plenty, pushing horticulture and agriculture into less suitable areas, meaning not only quality soil, but that has got the ability to hold on to nutrients and good water holding capacity. It's going to have a flow-on effect. If we push our food out closer to the hills, we will require more fertilizer and more irrigation to grow from these poorer soils, ultimately maybe hurting the wider environment in doing so. Or we look at importing our food and the price of vegetables goes up. Well, weighing in on this is Dr. VERA Power, the CEO of the fertilizer industry. And then to close the show, the toll the urban creep is having on our growers is worrying, because if they decide to get out of business, we have a major food security problem on our hands. As I just said, our Pukekohe grower will join us to wrap the situation, which is getting dire, and as I said, needs that intergenerational approach and some confidence in a lot of areas to make some big, bold decisions. As always with our programs, we want to keep the conversation ongoing, leading into potentially future shows on these topics. So I do appreciate your emails, and I certainly got some from the He Waka Eke Noa Know Your Number panel as well. To continue these conversations, send me an email with someone or something that we may have missed. So sarah@sarahscountry.com. Before we get underway, a big thanks to our partners Farmlands, who have partnered with us for the Opinion Maker as they help their farmers and grower shareholders navigate the uncertainty together to ultimately long-term be stronger. Up next, Dr. ALISON Collins from the Ministry for the Environment.
This is Sarah's Country. Join the conversation. Have thoughts on an interview? Or have you got questions you want answered by a future guest? Let us know. Email sarah@sarahscountry.com.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop and the things you need to live out here.
like electric fencing,
or horse feed,
or bee suits.
children,
chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear.
Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help you farm,
Grow, milk, dredge,
rear, come on in.
because we're out here too.
The ongoing and uncoordinated expansion of residential and lifestyle developments is competing with the land use of what is making up 14.4% of New Zealand's so-called highly productive land, with the suitable soil, topography and climate to grow a variety of crops and have feed our people, as outlined in the recent Our Land 2021 report. This is a deeper dive from when it all started in 2018, and he is hoping some policy direction may come from what has been eerily quiet, the national policy statement from the government, to move forward on finding a balanced approach to safeguard both the environment and, of course, the needs of our expanding population. Now, she was intrigued from an early age about how the world works. Our first guest, Dr. ALISON Collins, is the Departmental Chief Science Advisor to Mana Tumo Te Taiao, Ministry for the Environment. She studied soil science and what is known as geomorphology, how landscapes evolve, which has taken her around the world. ALISON spent 12 years working for Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research, leading a portfolio of scientists around ecosystems, soils, land use and infometrics, perfectly positioning her to discuss this topic with us. But ALISON's also worked alongside regional councils and central government agencies to understand and prioritise what their science needs are, and joins us now. ALISON, thank you very much for coming on this particular opinion maker around the Our Land 2021 report. Now, since you started your position August 2017, this is sort of when annual reporting of environmental reporting sort of kicked off in the partnership with Stats New Zealand. Can you give us a bit of an overview around that partnership and who was driving demand for more detailed reporting?
So the reporting program actually started in 2015 with the Environmental Reporting Act, which was there really to give all New Zealanders the opportunity to understand what was happening in the environment, what was at risk, what was changing, and why it mattered. And so the program was a partnership with Stats New Zealand and the government's statistician and Ministry for the Environment. The reports are produced independent of government, so nobody sees the reports until 24 hours before the release, and they're there really to bring together the best available information, whether that be data or science or matauranga, to help give people a sense of what's happening in the environment and what they should be concerned about.
Yeah, so an absolutely detailed report projecting New Zealand's population could get to 6.8 million by 2073, having passed 5 million in June last year. This is driving the demand for obviously land for housing, but also the land to feed them. Just going through some of the key facts from this report, what were the standouts that we need to pay attention to, ALISON?
There's lots of areas, I suppose, of interest. For me, I think it was just standing back and realising that the drivers of the way we use land start before we even step foot on the land. So as you talked about, where we choose to live, what we choose to buy, how we choose to make a living, all have an impact on the way that land is used and where.
And in terms of this particular highly productive land, this is soil that needs less irrigation and fertiliser to grow food. Traditionally is been found around our major cities on the outskirts. Of grave concern to many growers, but also the crossroads that regional councils are in to balance the needs of both. In your experience working with councils, are they armed with enough readily available information to make those decisions, ALISON?
Yeah, so I think many of the regional councils have got the data around where those soils are. And as you mentioned, there's less than 15% of our total land area is covered by what we call highly productive land, and an even smaller amount by more sort of elite soils. So they're aware of those things, but I suppose it's that balancing act between making the decisions about where we grow houses and where we grow trees, or where we grow crops and cattle. So it's a difficult one, and it just shows you how valuable land is. There's so many things that we derive, so much benefit and value we derive. So making those decisions is quite complex, but we do have to think about that, that 15% of which is a real asset and a resource for us. I think for me, one of the interesting things is it's not just there's an opportunity to think about this land in a over a longer time period, because once we do either fragment it or tar seal it, it's almost irreversible to then to be able to use it in the way of that's productive.
Oh, absolutely. Land is central to our identity here in New Zealand. Our whenua and our ecosystems are in so many ways. Obviously, our social ecosystem, being closer to major areas, the commuting time shortened down because obviously climate change, etc., isn't just as important as, of course, the valuable soils to produce food at a less environmental footprint just as much. So with regards to the report, yes, you're discussing population growth, land sprawl, and where it is placed, but also highlighting cattle numbers, the use of irrigation and fertiliser. To what level further do you want to probably expand and even go deeper in future reports?
Well, this report differs a little bit from the last report we released on land, which was in 2018. That was quite an encyclopedia. It talked about all sorts of issues. This was a particular focus, a deep dive on land use change and land use intensification, because we felt this was an emerging story that was of importance to people. What we will do with future reporting is look at other issues that matter that we need to do a commentary on. So it may be around soil health. That's another area of interest for us. I mean, we report a lot on soil quality, but really digging down into what soil health means could be another interesting area to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I know there is a huge amount of demand on soil carbon levels as well, working closely in conjunction with that. When it came to the collaborative nature of pulling together the report, what organisations were at the table and the motivations to, as you say, go deeper into these issues?
Well, I might just talk you through the process of producing a report. So we do that in partnership with Statistics New Zealand, that do provide that level of robustness around how we bring together data and indicators. And so the report is very much based on a set of indicators, but that's not on its own enough to tell the story. So we also look to what we call a body of evidence. So this could be research from the science community, it could be mataranga, observational data, case studies, and we bring all that together to help illustrate the issue that we're focusing on. To do that wisely in an informed way, we have to have a big group of analysts and writers, but we also have a team from outside of the Ministry and Statistics New Zealand that help advise us, and those come from Crown Research Institutes and universities, largely. So they help shape the report, do lots of review, and then towards the end we have a completely external and independent peer review by members of the science community that have expertise in the areas that we're focusing on within the report. So it goes through quite a lot of processes of quality assurance and review, and just helping to bring together all the best available data and information that we can to tell that story in a trustworthy and hopefully engaging way.
So the Minister for the Environment, the writing's on the wall. You are Chief Science Advisor to, in your department, to the Minister. I know you don't have influence, so to speak, exactly what policy will come from this report, but what goes forth from here in your advice to the Minister on the conversations he needs to be having with his Minister, Megan Woods, and Ministry for Housing at the same time?
Yeah, so we actually have a number of ministers. There's obviously the Environment Minister, but also associate ministers. And when we gave a briefing actually to ministers around this report, I think there were 5 or 6 different ministerial portfolios that are interested, and that just shows the value of land to so many different things, whether it be to conservation, primary production, housing. So really the report is there to lay all the information out to ministers as well as to the public so that we can have informed discussions about what happens next. And that's really as far as we can go with the report. It's about, providing that information so that people can have informed conversations. In those briefings to ministers, is there the work of your fellow colleagues at Manaki Whenua Lanke Research on suggestions of modelling and the advice on how to cement a national policy statement that protects our highly productive land? So there have been a number of people from the science community involved in looking at what a statement, a national policy statement on highly productive land would look like, and what it would need to include, and what sort of evidence we can bring to that. And as far as I know, that policy process is underway at the moment, but I probably can't comment on much more than that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, Dr. ALISON Collins, the departmental Chief Science Advisor at the Ministry for the Environment, following on from Our Land 2021, highlighting how the report process is and how it comes about to provide the most detailed reports to date on the state of the land fragmentation here in New Zealand, and also the direction of where future reports may lead. Now, up next, Philip Martelli, the Resource Management Manager for the Western Bay of Plenty District Council, will join us to see how they are dealing with urban sprawl around Tauranga and Te Puke on the highly valuable soils there.
This is Sarah's Country. Catch the latest on the matters that matter most wherever you are. Listen to Sarah's Country on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple or Google Podcasts. Try asking Alexa or Siri. Play Sarah's Country on podcast.
Nice boots.
Yeah, thanks. They're new.
Ben, you alright?
Oh, yeah, sorry mate. Just meerkatting pretty hard, eh? Yeah, I just said to myself, Ben, you work hard, you deserve new boots.
Well, the decision to subdivide for housing or plant kiwi fruit is primarily based on the economic returns to the landowner, and the competition for housing versus harvesting continues to rage as loud as in the council as it does with the lifestylers neighbouring where their food is produced, complaining about noise, spraying and traffic at busy times of the year. The disconnect from our food needs is real, and the need for it to be produced somewhere other than my backyard is something that Resource Management Manager Philip Martelli, who joins us now. Philip, thank you so much for joining us. I understand that being connected to our highly productive land and its land use from a council perspective is something that you've been heavily involved with in your role with the Western Bay of Plenty District Council for some time. Can you give us a little bit of a background into your role?
Well, my role is I've been here at the Western Bay Council for 30 years, and all through that time you could safely say that particularly lifestyle type subdivision has been quite desirable for landowners to subdivide, but also you got, as you've said, the urban growth has been quite strong, not only just for our towns and small towns like Katikati, Te Puke or Namokoroa, which is developing into a bigger new town, but also Tauranga with its expansion. So yeah, we've had a lot to juggle with that through the years. And the problem is the best place for housing is always usually the best place for kiwi fruit.
Yeah, and the thing too, I mean, Our Land 2021 is the report that we're discussing throughout this particular show, and it seems to me that it's all about the, managing with what you have measured, and the level of data within councils over that 30 years that you've been involved. Is it increasing the information and the data sets that regional councils and district councils are making these decisions based off?
I think you'll be careful about decisions because, which decisions are you basing it off? The problem being, I suppose, people need to have somewhere to live. So where should they live? But then where do you grow your food from? And, it's quite a broad picture. I think the challenge that we've now got facing us down here, and yes, we've got figures, and I can touch on those shortly, but the interesting one we've got here is that we're getting now a lot of kiwi fruit being planted out east. So it's moving a lot more out there, in particular dairy farms and others being converted. So people then ask the question, is it okay, for each hectare we might lose for housing, say around Tauranga, then we're probably getting another 10 hectares of orchard out east. So are we losing or not? And that's probably the conundrum we've got to try and sort out going forward.
When it comes to that highly productive soil that is around Tauranga, is that going to require higher fertiliser use or higher irrigation use when they're converting out east, as you said?
No, probably not. Because in terms of, well, it depends on where the water source is. A lot of it's groundwater, but then there's also bore water. So I know that's becoming more of an issue for the regional council, and that's, where some of the surface waters are getting near their maximum. Some of the aquifers are getting close to their maximum, but others aren't. So it depends how you manage that going forward. Fertiliser use, well, that's across the board. Now, one could argue that, maybe these properties are better off in kiwi fruit than dairy farming, but I won't get into that argument.
I mean, your title says it all, resource management, and the management of our resources is one to one and one to another, and very much in what direction a district like Tauranga that is growing at just as rapid rates of where we're based right here now in Selwyn in the South Island, Philip. So, weighing up these when you have the fragmentation and difference between a regional council, a district council, and the prerogative of central government, there's a lot of different people's agendas and where things should be. And how does your council, navigate making those difficult decisions?
To be fair, it hasn't been a major issue to date because obviously the MPS coming out last year. But obviously going forward, then we need to, take those into a lot more consideration. I think what's interesting is the context of the way the draft NPS has been worded so far. And it's sort of basically saying that at a regional level, you need to consider, okay, which are your versatile soils and which ones are you going to protect from urban development and which ones aren't you? We've yet to have that debate down here. But I think I'd like to pick it up a click a little bit, and I think where the NPS is a little bit probably weaker is like our soils are class 2s and 3s, but what about the class 1s, particularly like around Pukekohe and places like that? A lot of those are now getting off the hook a bit because if according to the NPS, if you're identified for future urban development, that's it. Even though you're not zoned for urban development, if that's it, then you're you're disposable. You can convert it, and I would suggest that for your class 1 soils is wrong. That's your main food producing soils, not your 2s and 3s.
Yeah, and so therefore, I mean, with most of our draft national policy statements, they're very light on a thing called detail, and it's of great concern to a lot of us that operate in the system to try and help navigate that for the people that are most affected. And so I'd really like to understand for the growers within the Bay of Plenty, what is the feedback on how to navigate that future planning of your area?
Well, from the growers' point of view, obviously the only ones that will be nervous are those are near the towns that have been earmarked for expansion, and they're fairly well known in this area already. So there should be no surprises for most people there. So those that are seriously looking at kiwi fruit, as I say, are those are ones that are developing the new orchards out east, where there's a lot more land, and it's of the same class, same soil, same climate, and everything else. The councils, here, both us and Tauranga City, we've had a growth management plan in place for some time, so it's been well known where we're heading. Like for us, it's Omokara, expansion there. There's some but further expansion Te Puke, which is on to orchard land, and most of those are in the process of being converted from orchard to housing now. And there's one bit left in Katikati. So those are sort of the ones we've been focusing on, and it's been well known for years that that's where the future growth will be. And from a planner, what I then balance that out with, well, okay, if we are using that highly productive land, then we've got to use it in the most efficient way possible. In other words, you don't just, go and develop a large lot residential. And I suppose that's where the other NPS for urban development comes in, about having, much greater intensification of urban development. So even though some of these new areas are greenfield going out, but they're also going to be up.
What happens if there isn't a demand for housing going up? And I've been reading some articles whereby you've been critical of the uneconomic nature of lifestyle block expansion over large periods as well, but that's where the demand is, and the person who owns that sort of certificate of title gets to fundamentally make the economic decision on what is best and where the demand comes from, does it not?
In part, but then if you're looking at those figures in terms of the lifestyle, it's not a rampant demand, it's quite a limited demand. And when you look at our district, we've got 4,000 vacant rural land titles out there, so technically you can cater for a lot of lifestyle development without having to do one more piece of subdivision. Okay, not all of them in the right place, but, they're out there. And again, you're right. I mean, if someone's got an orchard that's close to town, but it's zoned residential, well, they'll make a market decision in due course. And there's a lot of people in Amakara doing that and selling up their orchards to developers for housing.
What are your fellow colleagues, the planners in other areas around New Zealand, hoping that the National Policy Statement comes out and your advice to government on the best way to navigate that and provide you with the tools to be able to make sort of more intergenerational decisions, I'd say, and long-term focus planning as opposed to just meeting current market demand?
And you're absolutely right, Sarah. It's about not just looking at the current demand, it's what do we need for the future. And I think it comes back to what I was saying before in the sense of, the real elite soils, which are the class ones, should be absolutely reserved for food production. I mean, it's fine, put houses on there, but people have to eat. The rest of it, I think it's a bit more guidance around how do we apply it at the regional level. Like for us, as I say, if you've got plenty of class 2s and 3s, is some of that able to be used or not? And just that the draft MPS is probably just still a little bit vague on that. We'd certainly need more direction about how they see us interpreting that.
Fantastic.
Because again, the intention is to look after, your food producing land, because I mean that's the future of New Zealand.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Not just for feeding our own country, but as exports.
And 6.8 million people by 2073 is projected here as the New Zealand population alone that need fed just as much as our exports. So, and the growth of most of them living in the towns and cities with 87% of urbanisation happening here in New Zealand. Philip Martelli, thank you so much for your time here on Sarah's Country, Resource Management Manager for Western Bay of Plenty District Council.
This is Sarah's Country. Join the conversation. Have thoughts on an interview? Or have you got questions you want answered by a future guest? Let us know. Email sarah@sarahscountry.com.
Australia and New Zealand are home to some of the world's most innovative farming pioneers. Zematic is proud to partner with farmers who are committed to leading the way in sustainable water management. The Trailblazer Sustainable Irrigation Awards celebrate sustainable irrigation management, irrigation-driven improvements, waterway protection and environmental stewardship. See how our Trailblazers are leading the way at irrigationtrailblazer.com/winners.
Well, land is central to our identity here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It provides our means to make a living, and it intimately connects us to our tangata whenua, our land. Land use today shapes how land can be used into the future if we don't get it right. And the Our Land 2021 report highlights the changes in our land use, the intensification in certain areas, our population growth, and the threats to our highly productive soils that grow our essential food to feed our population. But also there's some limited data on soil fertility and the growth in the use of fertilisers within this report. Now, whilst no declining or improving trends in soil quality was observed from 1994 to 2018, the levels of ALISON phosphorus, an indication of soil fertility, was above the recommended target range for 61% of dairy farming and cropping sites and 46% of orchard vineyard sites sampled between 2014 and 2018. Now, the high levels of ALISON phosphorus is an indication of the too much fertiliser being applied. Joining us now is the Chief Executive for the Fertiliser Association, Dr. Vera Power. Thank you so much, Vera, for taking the time to join us on this Opinion Maker show around the Our Land report. Because I firstly want to ask you, how accurate is the data that we're reading from this report?
I think the first thing we probably have to say how important it is having these types of reports. Our whole agricultural base is based off our soils, so we really need to understand what's happening. And the reports up front that, there are gaps in the data. But probably, I suppose my concern, I'm particularly interested in the soil fertility data, is actually there's a huge amount of data available in the space, which isn't reflected in the report. And, we were concerned that, they're making statements about soil fertility, but it's off a tiny data set. And, we've recently published the results of 800,000 soil analysis on our website. So there's a huge substantive data set out there, and it's important we use these quality data sets when we're making decisions. Farmers are investing hugely in this space.
So what is the source then for the statistics I have in front of me?
Pardon, sir, I didn't hear that bit.
My apologies. The source of the data used in the Our Land Report 2021 then?
They've used data from regional councils, which as part of the routine monitoring, state of environment, but it's quite small. I think if I look, drill down into the data, there was 154 samples from dairy farms, across New Zealand. So that's a very tiny data set. And soil fertility will vary paddock to paddock, farm by farm, so you need a lot more detailed information on that.
There's a very big gap between 154 sites and the 800,000 soil monitoring sites that you have as well, Vera. And to me, it shows the lack of linkage between data captured on farms and our regional council to therefore be an overarching perspective of what we're measuring, and then therefore the rules set around how we manage it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to do a beat up of regional councils or MFE. I think, as we're making big decisions on how we manage our land, we have to make sure that we're using the best information available, I think. And that's why we pull some of this data together, so that we can be transparent. We show the efforts farmers are putting in. If you look at those 800,000 sample points, that's 45 million in lab analysis alone. If you think about the time spent in sampling, you can probably treble it. So this is a significant investment by farmers. They're doing exactly what they've been asked to do. Monitor your soils, manage your nutrients well based on what your crop and your soil are telling you. And over 50% of farmers are routinely, regularly monitoring their soils. The more intensive producers are doing it. A much higher proportion of them are doing it. So that it's really important that people understand what farmers are actually doing.
And another statistic that I have here as well is that they are reporting on the tonnage of nitrogen fertiliser sold as well. That is sharply increased from 62,000 to 452,000 tonnes from 1991 to 2019, naturally reflecting the boom of dairy here in New Zealand. But why so specific around tonnage spent, do you believe? And did they source all those statistics from you, the Fertiliser Association?
Well, I can't give out by that data because that's our data, And I think, even your comment, there's been a large increase. But before the 90s, there wasn't really any nitrogen fertilizer used, so of course there's a large increase. And you see over time, it's beginning to plateau out in terms of usage. So it's robust data based on what companies are supplying. You can see the phosphate use has gone the other way. There's probably a drop of a third compared to the peak use. So good information, tracking where we're going is really important.
The 15% of highly productive land that we're discussing that has this residential creep over that productive land because of the rich dense of nutrients and its ability to hold water is only naturally going to push, I can see, this horticulture growing land into poorer quality, more porous soils, which are going to require more fertiliser use. We see the potential of an increase in more nitrogen as a flow-on effect of residential soil?
No, I think because if you think of those elite soils, horticultural soils, they probably have, higher rates already of nutrient application. But, these versatile soils, are, they're very limited. If you're going to put concrete on top of them, it's going to remove them from food production, and I think we have to really see these as a resource for the whole country.
Yes, and one thing I didn't study soil science, just as a disclaimer, Vera, but I always find interesting parts and terminologies of things that we're monitoring that I think our audience may know if they also didn't study soil science. Macro porosity, the measure of pore spaces in soil, and a potential indicator of soil compaction was also measured in our land and water, and that there has been no improvement in this particular measurement of soil compaction on our dairy sites and our orchard and vineyard sites across New Zealand. Is that something that we should be focusing on closely in our land use reports?
I suppose they're trying to, in the report they're trying to think of what are the pressures on soil. It's probably not an area we've looked at closely. It's kind of sort of beyond our area of operation. But if you're, I presume it's using a similar data set from regional councils.
Can I just ask you now, and lastly, an overarching question around fertilisers' social licence to continue into the future, and how you as an organisation are working to sort of tell that fertiliser story, because it's sort of seeming to be a bit of a knowledge gap in New Zealand around our soil health, quality, its function in our ecosystems. But when it comes to a report like this, when we've got competing land use for housing versus food, it seems that nutrients becomes a part of our general interest as a country.
Oh, I think it is. And, everybody wants to see improvement in water quality in New Zealand, so we're all focusing in terms of how we manage those nutrients. Well, you would have seen, the last year government introduced a requirement for a cap on nitrogen fertiliser of 190. So farmers are working hard to adjust to that cap from 1st July. They have to be within that limit. It's a tough ask for a lot of farmers, and there's a lot of work going on. So I think it's really important that we actually, we are clear with our data and we tell the story of the efforts being made and what work is going on. It's hard to see the big context. Where does it fit? What are people doing? Is it real? Is it not? There's lots of social media commentary. There's lots of beat up against farmers. So being really clear about what the data is telling and how robust it is really important.
And interesting, as you've just sort of stated, and you wanted to be on the record to say that we just have to ensure that the data that we're reading is also genuinely correct in its sample size as well, to ensure that we've got the right environmental management based off the right numbers.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And give farmers credit for what they're doing, and I think, when they are, working hard to adjust to this new regime, I think it's really important that we give them credit for the work that's underway.
I totally 100% agree with you. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Vera Power, the CEO of Fertiliser Association New Zealand, and the continual discussion around our Land 2021, what it means for our country, and the detail within that report and how it will be utilised in terms of the soil identification and consequences of having the wrong urban planning decisions. Up next, to close the show, we're going to Pukekohe to talk to a vegetable grower around what he is seeing on the ground as the houses come closer and closer to his boundary. All that up next here on Sarah's Country.
This is Sarah's Country. Catch the latest on the matters that matter most wherever you are. Listen to Sarah's Country on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple or Google Podcasts. Try asking Alexa or Siri. Play Sarah's Country on podcast.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
Like electric fencing.
Or horse feed.
Or bee suits.
Children.
Chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear.
Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help you farm,
Grow.
Milk. Dredge.
Rhea, come on in.
Because we're out here too.
Well, when the government announced that they were working on new policy to protect New Zealand's best food growing soils with the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, Pukekohe grower BHARAT welcomed the move, saying something needed to be done to stop the most productive land in the country being converted into buildings before it was too late. Now, since 1998, 5,800 new lifestyle blocks a year have been given the green light by councils. BHANA said in recent years up to 150 hectares had been lost in Pukekohe to housing and light industrial. Minister O'Connor stood on BHANA's property for a photo op in the outskirts of Auckland back in 2019, and I'd love to know how much has changed. BHANA, you are seeing the houses literally up and around your vegetable growing operation since 2019. How much has changed?
No, what the government's done is they haven't actually come up with the policy yet. They say they're still working on the policy. So a lot of this ground a lot of this soil was rezoned for housing has been already rezoned, and the developers are at it once again, and they'll take up that land and build houses. Once you build a house, you will not be able to do anything else. And more concerning to us, being neighbours next to the residential plots, is the reverse sensitivity, because people coming into those houses have more rights than we've been doing or we've been having for the last 50 years. So, I cannot control the weather, the wind, and there are some days when we have to do what we have to do. Because you might only get 1 day out of 10, that's fine, and you have to go and put the spray on, or you have to go and put some fertiliser on, whereas you don't get a crop. And that's where the problem is. The reverse sensitivity of a lot of these things that we do, people can ring up the council and next thing, we're in trouble because somebody says that, the smell of the spray came across the road and into their house. So as far as the minister's concerned, what he's promised us, he hasn't delivered on it yet. They tell us that he's doing something about it. It takes a long time to get this sort of stuff through the government, through the caucus and the government big turning wheel. But when they want to change the Holiday Act or the Sickness Benefit Act, that can be done overnight. So I'm not too sure where they're coming from.
That's a very, very valid point. They want to make another public holiday. It's through, they want to take guns off people. How quick was that? You're so right. And why the wait? Nearly 3 years on, and the creep is only happening at a dramatic rate. You talked about earlier there around the rezoning of land. How far... What's the next step at being at the table with regards to Auckland's next phase of rezoning to see that creep further?
Well, if the minister doesn't do anything about rezoning for elite soils, whenever the Auckland Super City has another plan change, I think they have one every between 6 and 10 years. Then they can rezone again, and then they can take some more land into residential, and that's what we're up against at the moment. The Waikato is going through their plan change one, and they're doing exactly the same thing. Seems there's nothing stopping them at the moment. They're rezoning land that was being cropped for residential, and anything that's not residential, they're rezoning it future residential, which gives them the scope to say, well, next time they have a rezoning or a plan change, they can bring that stuff into residential.
And I suppose with this national policy statement looming, the councils, whilst they've got a plan change going on, will think, well, let's try and future-proof it and do more than we actually need now, just in case government policy comes in and disallows us. It's a bit different in the Waikato. There's a little bit more of land to spread, but where you are on the Bombay Hills, it's tight bottleneck with regards to where that highly productive soil is. Would you give our listeners a bit of an understanding, BHANA, around what makes up this highly productive soil from its ability to hold nutrients and hold water?
I think the biggest advantage that we've got here is that we can produce a crop 365 days of the year. Other areas in New Zealand find it hard to do that. There is some soil like that right up north, but that's miles away from the market. It takes you 6 or 7 hours just to get down from there to the Auckland city markets. So, and the worker, getting workers up there is pretty tight. So that's there is not feasible as far as we're concerned. the other thing that's probably good to notice here, or good to put in the mix, is that this soil has already been cropping for over 100 years, and we're still producing good crops that are nutritious and healthy for our consumers. And, I'm not too sure where else they can do that. We send produce down to the South Island for about 10 or 12 weeks of the year. Which is, a lot of people don't know that, but that's what we do. We're supplying food for Taupo North most of the time. So, and along with that, there's still a lot of crops that go for export, which, New Zealand needs export dollars. So there's a lot of things that this soil can do if it was left to do what it's supposed to do. But once you built a house or built a factory, then it's never going to do that again.
Yeah, and I didn't know that so much, but that's the big key thing from a consumer. They're demanding a range of vegetables consistently all year round, when seasonally that is not the case via nature. If you were to eat from your own backyard, you would have to eat to the seasons, and of course to produce, have that supply all year round, it takes compromise. What do you believe would be the ideal solution to this national policy statement for a highly productive soils that balances it with the demands of a housing portfolio also in the room, and trying to achieve both harmoniously?
Well, housing, if you go around the country, houses can be built anywhere. If you go to Wellington, they got houses on terraces. They don't have to use up good land in Wellington to grow houses. They didn't go where the airport is. So you can build houses just about anywhere, but you cannot go and do cropping. And with the report that came out a couple of weeks ago by a government department that says that in the last 2 decades, we've used up 54% of our cropping land in the last 20 years for housing, doesn't leave much left. We've got about 15% of land in New Zealand that's ideal for cropping, and already we've used up 54% of it. They're not making any more new soil, and as the population grows, we're going to be needing more food, more vegetables, and maybe we may be an importing country like some of the other countries in the world.
How much louder do you think the horticulture sector needs to be? I understand there's a change of the guard at Horticulture New Zealand, and the rise of the grower to be able to drive home these problems. Is it just continuously getting drowned out by mainstream media and, of course, government, or are you seeing some form of shining light through an open door to this discussion?
No, I don't think there's any shining light yet. This government we got at the moment have got a portfolio to do anything because they've been voted in by the masses, and they will do exactly what they want to do on their own thing. I don't think that they realise how serious things are here, and if people of the older generation would remember, there was cropping from Albany right down to Pukekohe. You had Albany, you had Whenuapai, you had Otahu, Papatoi, Papakura, all that was cropping. And now that's all gone over the last 20 odd years. All of that's gone. And now they've started on Pukekohe. And after this area, apart from that one that's right up north, which is frost-free, there's no other land that you can probably produce crops that are 365 days of the year. If we want to be an importing nation and get food in from more than likely a third world country, food safety is a big thing. How are we going to know if we've got the right documentation of food safety? And maybe the next generations after us won't know what fresh vegetables are, because just go to the supermarket and get her out of the freezer. I think there's something wrong with that when we've got all this land that we had, and we're really only caretakers here, and we're doing the wrong thing.
Just lastly, BHANA, the land is being sold by growers to the highest bidder as well, and so therefore growers are selling up and sort of folding to that as much. But at the same time, it is the economic reality of it for potentially, older retiring growers.
Yeah, no, I think, look, I've got nothing against anybody selling anything. If a grower's been put into that position where his land is rezoned for housing and he can get those big dollars, well, good on him, because, that's the way it is. The government, however, should do what they promised they were going to do, and that may change things, but I've got nothing against anybody selling to the highest bidder. But if there was some, if you go on the motorway and the motorway says you can only do 100, do you see too many people doing 200? So, there needs to be some rules around elite soils. And I think eventually when elite soils are that tight, you won't be able to, even growers won't be able to afford to buy them, because with everything else that we've got to be put up with, all the cost, all the other things that we've got to do, even ourselves sometimes we're thinking, what are we doing? What are we wasting our time for? Maybe we should be selling in gardens. You do get watered down, or you keep hitting your head against a brick wall. And after a while, you start thinking like the same as everybody else. Say, well, what are we doing? Let's get out of it. It's not worth it.
And this is scary reality in that we put our faith in intergenerational thinking on behalf of the government to the future food security of our people, our population, our population growth. Yet, it's being put down to the private ownership of the particular highly fertile soils. And it's a very, very scary and real reality for the likes of yourself, BHANA. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to join us on this particular program. Well, I'd really love your thoughts. Please send me an email, Sarah@Sarah's Country. It's absolutely heartbreaking that we continuously hear those vegetable growers who keep us healthy and fed are banging their heads against a wall, and that is a house that's neighbouring and moving in right next door to that very highly productive land. And that report that states 54% of our highly productive land is gone. It's gone forever. And that's only in 20 years. 20 years literally is, a quarter of a person's life. It's so small. And it's our job, if we seriously want to utilise that word kaitiakitanga, which means to be the guardian, then seriously, New Zealand, this is one of the most crucial crises facing our country's future. And I really hope to God that this national policy statement comes to some form of fruition by the end of 2021. Otherwise, I tell you what, if there's one thing I'm going to protest on the steps of Parliament about, it will be for the protection of those who can't speak, our soils. I know it sounds ridiculous, and I'm saying it with so much conviction and passion, but I think that you listening along after what you've heard will be in my camp, because it's an absolute crime, to be honest. Now, coming up on The Opinion Maker next week, we have a special for you. Myself and Joel were invited to take the show on the road, and we headed down to Geraldine at the invitation of the Forest Owners Association Chair, Phil Taylor, to have a look at his day job. Managing Director of Port Blakely, a US-based family-owned operation, an ex-New Zealand Forest Service forest operation. And he said, feel free to ask whatever questions you like. So we took the camera and we took out your questions as well as mine to uncover the sort of stigma around what is a production forest and its role in our rural communities. So all that Tuesday, 7 o'clock, premiered on Facebook and YouTube. And of course, you can get it first in your inbox, knowing on what's coming up and what you may have missed. All you need to do is subscribe to the Sarah's Country Club at sarahscountry.com, and we send you an email each Sunday night, keeping you up to date on the thought, opinion and change makers within our primary sector here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. In the meantime, keep that open mind as open as you can, that heart just as open, and it will do you well, I promise. Haere rā.